The only plan out there to preserve and protect Medicare for current and future retirees is the plan that we put forward.
Republican plan to end Medicare is a non-starter here in the Senate. I hope my Republican colleagues will stop pursuing this misguided plan and start working with Democrats on smart ways to reduce the deficit.
That was House Speaker John Boehner and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid this week. Just part of the growing political battle over what to do about Medicare. And we're back now with the panel. Bill, the big development this week was the special election in upstate New York in which Kathy Hochul, a Democrat, won in a district that has gone Republican for more than a half a century. While it wasn't the only factor, Paul Ryan's Medicare plan was a big issue there. How big a problem is it for Republicans?
It's a problem if they don't have anyone who can defend it well and defend it aggressively and say that the choice is not the status quo and Paul Ryan's reforms. The choice is Paul Ryan's reforms or Obamacare or some other kinds of changes to Medicare because the status quo is unsustainable. We're going broke. Jane Corwin in New York 26 was unable to make that case. It's pretty important that the Republican candidates next year and the Republican presidential candidate, I would add, be able to make that case.
But Nina, both sides in the aftermath of the New York 26 race held their ground. Senate Republicans, except for 4 of them, all voted for the Ryan plan when it came up for kind of a show vote in the Senate. And yet House and Senate Democrats just intensified their attacks. So who's right?
Well, I think the Republicans ultimately are going to have the high ground on this. I mean, you look at the conventional wisdom now is hardening around this idea that this is going to be an albatross around the Republicans' necks. But if you listen to 2 little moments last week, one was Bill Clinton whispering to Paul Ryan backstage at a debt commission debate, I'm worried. I'm glad we won the New York special election, but I'm worried it's going to give us an excuse to do nothing. The other moment to me was House Democratic.
But let me just say, he also said that the Ryan plan was wrong.
That's right, but he's worried that they're doing nothing.
Right.
Same thing. House Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer says, look, Medicare reform has to be on the table, he told a reporter this week. But we're not going to come out with specifics because it's dangerous. Look what happened to Paul Ryan. That says to me that they know they don't have the guts to pursue serious reform, and they know they have to. It is going bankrupt. I mean, if you don't have serious reform, you are signing the death papers for Medicare, and I think that's a very viable case to make.
The Republicans own this thing. You add the House and the Senate together, there are 288 Republicans in Congress, 275 of them have voted for this. They own it. But there is this huge debate going on inside the Republican caucus right now, and how did we get here? They looked, during the whole Obamacare debate, they looked at Democrats and said, how could they be spending all of this time on national health care when the public cares most about jobs? And they ran and won in November on jobs, 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 jobs. And now, 5 months later, they find themselves mired in this Medicare debate. And what you saw this week was they're trying to pivot to jobs in the economy. There's horrible irony in that world, but they are trying to pivot to jobs in the economy. Eric Cantor came out with this new jobs creator plan. So they're going to try to emphasize what they seem to have forgotten for a while, which is that the public's #1 concern remains jobs in the economy.
But Byron, I get a sense of what you're saying. You think that voting for the Paul Ryan plan and making it such a big deal and now seeing it dominate the debate, because quite frankly the Republican plan on the economy, which isn't all that new, kind of vanished without a trace this week. You think that was a mistake?
Well, we don't have a word called Medicare for nothing. They knew this was going to happen, but I think they have been surprised at the degree to which it's completely taken over the debate, and the other pro-growth parts of the Ryan plan and their own growth policies have just fallen aside.
I mean, let's look at this from the Democrats' point of view, because their plan at this point seems to be exactly, Medicare. We're not going to offer anything. The Senate Democrats decided this week they're not going to offer a budget. They don't have a plan to cut Medicare, and they're just simply going to say, look at what those guys are doing. Can they make that work all the way till 2012?
Yes, they can. Well, it's not that they're offering nothing. They have a plan. They have a health care plan, the Affordable Care Act, on the table, and when they put the plan up there, and it has some cuts in terms of things like Medicare Advantage in it, all Republicans did was use scare tactics and talk about death panels and this is terrible, this is intrusive government. The fact is that now with the Paul Ryan plan, the Republicans have put something on the table that is extremely unpopular, as we just saw in the special election. And all this talk including on this panel, about, well, it's just a messaging problem. You know what? Jane Corwin, the Republican, she tried exactly the message you guys have said. Oh, we know it's really about the deficit issue. Don't forget the deficit voters. You know what the voters said? This is a bad plan for seniors. It's going to drive up costs for us in terms of care at the end of our lives, and we don't want it. And we don't want it for our kids. And grandfathering in people over 55, those people still said, we don't want you to do it.
Even with the health care reform, the prediction is Medicare is going bankrupt. You can't get away from that. And it's important to note, the Ryan plan's not going to pass the Senate. It's a Democratic-controlled Senate, but there are other plans out there. There's Alice Rivlin, the Democrat, has joined with Senator Pete
That was the plan that the House offered.
Yes.
That is the plan. I mean, Paul Ryan may be the face of the Republican Party more than anybody else on Capitol Hill.
You don't see Senate Democrats rushing to embrace that or any other serious reforms as a negotiating point. You don't see that. What you see you see them hiding because they're afraid to stand up to activists who will call this, that will say that this is cruel or
Let me just say, you must have forgotten. Newt Gingrich I guess it was a few Sundays ago, said it was Republican radicalism and social engineering. Tim Pawlenty, says that he likes it, but he'll introduce his own plan. I think what you see is a failure of the presidential candidates on the Republican side to support this, and I don't think you see a good job even being done by Republicans in the House and Senate in terms of making the case for it, because everybody knows it's a loser.
Republicans would say that Obamacare cut $500 billion from Medicare to insure previously uncovered people, whereas their plan cuts it to extend the life of Medicare. That is a difference.
They also need to be more aggressive, making the case that ultimately competition will improve Medicare, and I think that's something they've been too much in the mode of, oh, our cuts are going to be delayed. They need to really explain, which I believe to be true incidentally, that these reforms would actually improve the quality of health care in the country.
In other words, you trust the insurance industry.
But leaving aside these silly talking points,
but wait a minute, that is the argument that's going to be made.
Fine, and look, in 2012, there's the man on the ballot called President Obama. He passed Obamacare. The choice will be Obamacare versus the Republican vision for the future of health care, and the choice will be on the debt and deficit, which is an even bigger issue than Medicare in particular. Which party do you believe is serious about the fact that we are going broke? And if Republicans can't convince the country in 2012 that A, we're going broke, and B, the Obama administration and the Democratic Party aren't serious about it, then the Republican Party deserves. Then the Republican Party deserves to lose.
Now,
honestly,
Bill,
if they can't nominate a candidate who can make this case.
Okay, so the big difference between you and me is you trust the insurance companies who have been absolutely abusive of people, and secondly, Republicans, for all this talk about, oh, the deficit, the debt, we have to be serious, entitlement reform, refuse to consider raising taxes.
One, serious Democrats in think tanks who actually want reform trust making it more of a private system than it is now.
Why would anybody trust the insurance companies? This is a puzzle to me.
The problem for Republicans, this is a huge experiment. Even with the bad news we've had about Medicare, the problems are more than a decade away. It is a huge experiment to try to convince the voters that we have to do something really big right now for a problem that is still on the horizon.
Well, I'm glad we settled that. Thank you. Thank you all, panel. See you next week. Don't forget to check out Panel Plus, where our group picks right up with a discussion on our website, foxnewssunday.com, and we promise we'll post the video before noon Eastern Time. Up next, our Power